Why did medieval people sleep in two shifts? They didn't just lie in bed all night. They woke up, moved around, and lived in the dark hours. So what were they really doing during this middle of the night time, and why was it considered normal? Medieval people had a weird habit of splitting their sleep into two separate chunks every night. They would sleep for 4 hours, wake up, stay awake for a while, then sleep again until morning. This wasn't some crazy experiment. It was just how everyone slept back then. The reason behind this strange sleep pattern starts with something we barely think about today: darkness. Well, when the sun went down in medieval times, the world didn't just get dim. It became completely, utterly black. No street lights, no house lights glowing through windows, no phone screens lighting up faces. The medieval world at night was darker than a sealed coffin. This total darkness changed everything about how people lived their evening hours. Without any artificial light to keep them busy, most folks had no choice but to head to bed shortly after sunset. What else were they supposed to do? Stumble around in the pitch black, trying to find something to occupy their time? During winter months, this early bedtime became even more extreme. The sun would disappear as early as 4 or 5 in the afternoon in northern parts of Europe. People would finish their dinner while they could still see their food, then settle down for the night by 8 or 9 o'clock. But going to bed this early created an interesting problem. People weren't exhausted like we are after staying up until 11 or midnight. They were just following the natural cycle of light and darkness. Their bodies still had energy left over. Then this early bedtime had a predictable result. After sleeping for about 4 hours, people would naturally wake up. Not because something disturbed them or because they had a bad dream. Their bodies had simply gotten enough rest for the first part of the night and were ready to be awake again. Going to sleep at 8 was like eating dinner at 3 in the afternoon. Your body knew something was off about the timing. The thing is, when people woke up at midnight or 1 in the morning, the night wasn't over yet. There were still several hours of darkness left before sunrise, but they couldn't just get up and start their day because everything was still pitch black outside. So medieval people developed a simple solution. They accepted that waking up in the middle of the night was completely normal. They didn't panic about it or worry that something was wrong with them. They just called this first period of sleep their first sleep and knew that more sleep would come later. Medieval folks treated midnight wake-ups like intermission at a play, just a natural break before the second act started. This natural pattern of early bedtimes and nighttime waking would become the foundation for how medieval society organized itself. But there was more to this midnight awakening than just waiting around in the dark. The human body runs on its own internal clock, and medieval people were following it perfectly. Modern scientists have discovered something surprising about how our bodies are supposed to sleep, and it turns out the medieval way was actually the natural way. When darkness falls, our brains start making a chemical called melatonin. This chemical acts like nature's sleeping pill, making us drowsy and signaling that it's time to rest. In medieval times, without bright electric lights messing up this process, melatonin would start flowing as soon as the sun went down. People would naturally feel sleepy and ready for bed right after sunset. Their bodies were responding exactly the way human bodies are designed to respond to darkness. Now, here's what makes this really interesting. After about 3 to 4 hours of solid sleep, our bodies naturally move into a lighter phase of rest. During this lighter phase, it becomes much easier to wake up. Medieval people weren't fighting against their biology when they woke up at midnight. They were working with it perfectly. Their sleep cycle had a built-in coffee break that happened automatically every night. Modern sleep researchers wanted to test this theory about natural sleep patterns. They took volunteers and put them in environments with only natural light sources. No electric bulbs, no computer screens, no bright artificial lights, just candles and sunlight, exactly like medieval times. After a few weeks, something amazing happened. These modern people started developing the exact same 2-part sleep pattern that medieval folks had used. The volunteers would fall asleep shortly after dark, sleep for about 4 hours, then wake up naturally in the middle of the night. Turns out, this experiment proved that the medieval sleep pattern wasn't strange or unusual. It was actually the way human beings are naturally designed to sleep. We're the ones with weird sleep habits, not them. The 2-part sleep pattern also explains why some people today wake up in the middle of the night and feel perfectly alert. Their bodies might be trying to return to this ancient rhythm that's built into our DNA. Medieval people understood something important. that we've forgotten. The human body doesn't need to sleep for 8 hours in one continuous block. It needs about 8 hours total, but those hours can be divided up into 2 separate periods. The first sleep period was for physical recovery. During these first 4 hours, the body would repair itself, muscles would relax, and energy stores would be refilled. Sleep worked like a 2-part charging system. First, you charged your body, then you charged your mind. After the midnight break, people would enter their second sleep. This second period was different from the first. It was lighter, more filled with dreams, and focused on mental restoration rather than physical recovery. The whole system worked like having 2 different mechanics working on your car. One fixed the engine, the other tuned up the radio. But this natural rhythm wasn't just about what happened inside people's bodies. Medieval society had actually built its entire structure around this sleep pattern. Medieval society didn't just tolerate people waking up in the middle of the night, it actually required it. The Catholic Church, which controlled almost every aspect of daily life, had organized their entire schedule around the 2-sleep system. Monasteries provide the perfect example of how this worked in practice. Monks were required to wake up for midnight prayers called matins and lauds. These weren't optional activities. They were mandatory prayers that happened every single night in monasteries across Europe. The church basically scheduled God's business hours to match everyone's natural insomnia. Think about how perfectly this timing worked out. Monks would go to bed after evening prayers around 8 or 9 o'clock. They would sleep their first sleep for about 4 hours. Then, right when their bodies naturally wanted to wake up, the monastery bells would ring for midnight prayers. Now it wasn't just monks who lived this way. Church bells in every town and village would ring throughout the night, marking different hours and activities. People became used to hearing these bells and knowing what time it was, even in complete darkness. Religious writings from this period describe the 2-sleep pattern as completely normal and even healthy. Medieval doctors recommended the split sleep schedule in their medical texts. They believed that people who tried to sleep straight through the night without waking were actually damaging their health. The church taught that the quiet midnight hours were perfect for personal prayer and reflection. This time wasn't considered lost sleep. It was considered valuable spiritual time. People would use these hours to think about their lives, pray silently, or contemplate religious teachings they had heard during the day. Night watches were another important part of medieval society that worked with the natural sleep rhythm. Guards would patrol towns and cities during the night, but they worked in shifts that lined up with when people were naturally awake. Medieval security worked like a relay race where everyone passed the baton at exactly the right moment. The social acceptance of nighttime waking meant that people didn't worry about sleep problems the way we do today. If you woke up at midnight and couldn't fall back asleep immediately, that was expected. Normal, even. Beyond that, religious festivals and holy days often included special midnight services that took advantage of people's natural wake periods. Instead of fighting against the body's desire to be awake in the middle of the night, the church embraced it and used it for worship. Medieval religious life was perfectly synchronized with human biology, like having a prayer schedule written by your own body clock. But what exactly were people doing during these mysterious hours between first and second sleep? The time between first and second sleep wasn't just quiet, waiting around in the dark. Medieval people had transformed these midnight hours into some of the most interesting and productive parts of their entire day. Prayer and meditation topped the list of midnight activities for most people. The darkness and silence of the night created a perfect atmosphere for spiritual thinking. The mind was calm, distractions were minimal, and the peaceful feeling made religious thoughts seem more meaningful. But not everyone spent their midnight time in prayer. Wealthy families who could afford candles and oil lamps had access to a whole different world of nighttime activities. These people would actually get out of bed and move around their homes during the wake period. Reading was incredibly popular among those who could afford both books and light sources. Medieval books and early printed materials often contained special prayers or meditations designed specifically to be read during the midnight hours. Rich people's midnight reading was like having a personal library that only opened when everyone else was asleep. Letter writing was another common midnight activity. People would use the quiet, peaceful atmosphere to write to family members, business partners, or friends. The calm feeling of the night made it easier to think clearly and put thoughts into words. Meanwhile, medical and religious writings from the period openly discussed another common midnight activity: intimacy between married couples. Doctors and church leaders actually recommended that husbands and wives use the wake period for physical closeness. The reasoning was practical. During the day, couples were busy with work, children, and household duties. But the midnight period offered privacy and quiet time for couples to connect with each other. Farmers and people living in rural areas used the midnight hours for practical tasks. Someone would get up to check that fires were still burning safely in the fireplace. Animals might need attention or care. Small household jobs that were difficult to complete during busy daylight hours could be handled during this peaceful time. Medieval midnight hours were like having a secret second shift where everything ran quieter and slower. The midnight gap typically lasted between 1 and 2 hours. People seemed to know instinctively when it was time to return to bed for second sleep. They would finish their prayers, put away their books, complete their tasks, and settle back under their blankets. Medieval people didn't use this time to worry or stress about their problems. They treated the midnight hours as a bonus, extra time in the day that could be used for reflection, connection, or gentle productivity. Waking up at midnight wasn't seen as a problem to fix. It was like finding an extra hour that had been hiding in your day. But not everyone experienced these midnight hours in exactly the same way. The two-sleep pattern might have been universal in medieval times, but the midnight experience was completely different depending on whether you were rich or poor, urban or rural. Poor families often lived in small, single-room homes where everyone shared the same sleeping space. When one person woke up during the midnight period, the whole family knew about it. Actually, the shared midnight experience brought poor families closer together. They developed a sense of nighttime intimacy and connection that wealthier households with separate bedrooms often missed out on. But being poor also meant having fewer options during the midnight hours. No expensive candles for reading, no private spaces for personal activities. Most poor families would simply lie in bed during their wake period, talking softly or praying silently until second sleep returned. Poor families' midnight hours were like group meditation sessions where everyone participated whether they wanted to or not. Wealthy families lived in a completely different nighttime world. They had separate bedrooms, private spaces, and most importantly, they could afford candles and oil lamps. Access to artificial light transformed their midnight hours into active, productive time. They would get up, light their candles, and move freely around their homes. Some would read books in private libraries. Others would write letters or work on personal projects that required concentration and good lighting. Noble families sometimes took their midnight activities to elaborate levels. They would host small gatherings during these hours. Quiet dinner parties, card games, or musical performances. Rich people turned midnight into their own private social hour, like having an exclusive club that met in pajamas. On the other hand, large households with many servants created their own complex nighttime systems. Some servants would remain on partial duty throughout the night, taking turns staying awake during different periods. City dwellers, regardless of their social class, experienced more nighttime activity than people living in rural villages. Cities never completely slept, even in medieval times. Rural families experienced much deeper quiet during their midnight hours. The only sounds were natural ones: wind through trees, animal noises, or weather patterns. This created a more intimate, personal experience during the wake period. Rural midnight hours were so quiet you could hear your own thoughts echo, which was either peaceful or terrifying, depending on what you were thinking about. But whether rich or poor, urban or rural, all medieval people shared one important experience. Their sleep patterns changed dramatically with the seasons. Medieval sleep patterns weren't the same throughout the entire year. People adjusted their rest schedules based on the changing seasons, creating a flexible system that worked with nature's rhythms rather than fighting against them. Winter was when the two-sleep pattern became most obvious and pronounced. Darkness would fall as early as 4 or 5 in the afternoon, forcing people to finish their evening meals by candlelight and head to bed by 8 o'clock. During these extended winter nights, the gap between first and second sleep could stretch to 2 or even 3 hours. People had plenty of time for midnight activities because dawn wouldn't arrive until 7 or 8 in the morning. What's more, winter also made the two-sleep pattern feel more natural and necessary. Cold temperatures made staying in bed appealing, but the incredibly long nights made it impossible to sleep continuously for 12 or 13 hours. Winter nights were so long that sleeping straight through would have been like trying to hold your breath for an entire movie. Summer brought completely different sleep challenges. When the sun didn't set until 8 or 9 at night, people couldn't go to bed as early as they did during winter months. They had more daylight hours available for work and activities, which naturally pushed bedtime later. During the shortest summer nights, the two sleep patterns sometimes compressed into one continuous period of rest. With only 6 or 7 hours of total darkness, there simply wasn't enough time for a lengthy midnight gap. Sometimes people would take afternoon naps during summer months to make up for the shortened nighttime sleep periods. These midday rest breaks helped balance out the reduced nighttime hours and kept people's energy levels stable throughout the long summer days. Agricultural work also influenced seasonal sleep patterns. During harvest season, farmers would work extended hours and might delay their usual early bedtime to finish crucial tasks. Harvest season sleep schedules were like trying to fit a full day's work into 18 hours. Something had to give, and it was usually the midnight break. Spring and autumn created gradual transitional sleep experiences. As daylight hours slowly increased or decreased, people would naturally adjust their bedtimes and wake periods accordingly. This seasonal flexibility in sleep patterns demonstrates how adaptable human beings can be when we work with natural cycles instead of fighting against them. Medieval people didn't view changing sleep schedules as inconsistent. They saw seasonal adjustments as a natural part of living in harmony with their environment. Medieval people's sleep schedules changed with the seasons like leaves changing color. It wasn't weird, it was just what nature did. The two-sleep system had worked successfully for centuries, adapting to seasons, social classes, and individual needs. But changes were coming that would eventually destroy this ancient pattern completely. The medieval two-sleep pattern didn't disappear overnight. It took several centuries for this ancient system to fade away completely, but when it finally did, it vanished so thoroughly that most people today have never heard of it. The first challenge to the two-sleep system came from an unexpected source: improved lighting technology. As oil lamps became more efficient and affordable, people could extend their evening activities well beyond sunset. Wealthy families were the first to change their sleep habits. With access to better lighting, they began staying awake later in the evenings. Instead of heading to bed at 8 o'clock, they might remain active until 9 or 10. This later bedtime created a chain reaction that affected the entire sleep cycle. When you go to bed at 10 instead of 8, your body doesn't naturally wake up at midnight anymore. The wake-up period shifts to 2 or 3 in the morning, and the second sleep phase becomes much shorter. Artificial lighting was like a slow-acting poison for the two-sleep system. It didn't kill it immediately, but it weakened it generation by generation. Eventually, by the 18th century, coffee houses and social clubs in major cities were staying open until very late hours. Urban residents could spend their evenings socializing, conducting business, or enjoying entertainment instead of following the traditional early bedtime schedule. Gaslighting during the 19th century delivered another major blow to segmented sleep patterns. Streets could be illuminated at night, making evening travel much safer and more common. Then came the Industrial Revolution, which completely transformed how society thought about time, productivity, and human schedules. Factory work demanded consistent timing. Workers needed to arrive at specific hours and work for predetermined periods. The two-sleep pattern became incompatible with industrial efficiency and the demands of mechanized production. Companies couldn't organize work schedules around employees' natural midnight wake periods. Factory owners wanted workers who operated like machines, predictable, consistent, and definitely not taking mysterious midnight breaks. Electric lighting delivered the final blow to medieval sleep patterns. Once people could flip a switch and eliminate darkness completely, the natural rhythm of light and dark that had controlled human sleep for thousands of years became irrelevant. By the early 20th century, the concepts of first sleep and second sleep had completely faded from common knowledge. People who woke up in the middle of the night were now considered to have insomnia or sleep disorders requiring medical treatment. The modern 8-hour sleep block became the new standard that everyone was expected to follow. Sleep experts recommended going to bed at a reasonable evening hour and sleeping continuously until morning. The irony is that many of our current sleep problems might actually result from fighting against the natural two-sleep pattern that medieval people followed so easily. Millions of people today struggle with middle-of-the-night insomnia, lying awake wondering what's wrong with them. Medieval people would have recognized this midnight alertness as completely normal and natural. They would have used the time productively instead of worrying about it. We traded a sleep system that worked for thousands of years for one that gives millions of people insomnia, which might be the worst deal in human history.